Finance Agency Director William Pulte filed a second criminal referral against Cook, saying she misrepresented a third property, first calling it her second home, then declaring it a rental property. Pulte sending that referral to the Department of Justice as he urges the DOJ to look into the, quote, extremely troubling documents. Joining me now is the man himself, U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency Director and the chairman of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, William J. Pulte. Mr. Chairman, great to have you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Why a second criminal referral?
Well, as you know, mortgage fraud is a huge priority of ours. It's been a huge priority, contrary to what Democrats and everybody wants to say since March. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. If you commit mortgage fraud in this country, we're going to come after you. And in the case of Ms. Cook, it appears that she has committed blatant mortgage fraud. And we can't be having somebody like that in the Federal Reserve. So it will be up to the DOJ what they end up doing here, but things do not look very good for Ms. Cook.
Well, I mean, she's denying it, William. What do you want to say to her since she's denying it and she's actually suing President Trump?
I don't know if she is denying it, and that's what's very concerning, right? These documents are authentic. These documents match. People have to take responsibility for their actions. She's not coming out, to your point, and denying it.
Okay.
Instead, she's doing doublespeak with her attorneys and trying to play all kinds of games and attack us as the investigators. Look, we're impartial. We are the housing agency. We are focused on prosecuting mortgage fraud. If we see it, we have an obligation to do something about it, and we're not going to be deterred by politicians or criminal subjects' defense attorneys.
Actually, you make a great point, because even when the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was with me last week, he said one thing we're not hearing is, I didn't do it.
That's correct, and that's what's very concerning. Instead, they're choosing to attack me and attack other great Americans who are just trying to protect the integrity of the market. But look, President Trump is focused on getting this housing market booming again. The last 4 years, has been terrible. Joe Biden and Jerome Powell did something terrible with interest rates. And I'll say one thing, which is that people talk about the independence of the Fed. The Fed has not been independent for the last 4 years, and you see that with Jerome Powell not holding Lisa Cook accountable. I mean, this is clearly, in what appears to be, blatant mortgage fraud, and Jerome Powell is silent. If anything, he's showing the lack of independence of the Fed, and it's by his own doing. So we couldn't get a new chairman soon enough, and hopefully that will solve a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and that's what I posed to Christine Lagarde last week. I said, I mean, isn't there an argument to be made that Powell already violated being independent when he came into the job, and 3 seconds in, he came up with all these climate change rules and, and DEI rules, and then cut rates right before a presidential election. But, Mr. Chairman, you're also highlighting mortgage and occupancy fraud overall and its impact on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You say that even the Federal Reserve calls occupancy fraud, quote, a contributor to the housing bubble. Is President Trump going to declare a national emergency on this?
Well, we'll see what the president ends up deciding to do. I saw Secretary Bessent's comments over the weekend, and I agree with it, which is we're looking at what the president has available to him. This president understands real estate. He understands housing better than anybody. We will fix this housing market. It's just a shame that we've got this massive headwind in front of us, which are these high interest rates. So, that's on the policy side of the interest rates. But on the legality side, that's equally concerning, because if you're not running things well, and, Secretary Bessent has also called for an internal review at the Fed. This is case number one as to the mortgage fraud. Why is Jerome Powell not out there? He should be out there saying, I condemn mortgage fraud, and if Lisa Cook did something, she should step down. And he may not have the authority technically to fire her, but he can certainly do what he did with these other two people who had trading problems, put his arm around her and say, look, you're destroying the credibility of the Fed. And unfortunately, I believe Jerome Powell is complicit in the destruction of the credibility of the Fed by his silence on this mortgage fraud matter.
Is there anything else you want to say about these other criminal referrals that we've spoken about? Adam Schiff, Letitia James?
No, I just want to say that, I want to stick with the referrals. I'll leave it to the DOJ to comment on the rest of the stuff. But, I would just encourage people, they've got to be accurate and timely with regard to their reporting. Ms. Cook had issues with not just the application, but also in reporting. She took out a second home, for example, and then 8 months later said that it was an investment property. With regard to Senator Schiff, I've been a little disappointed that, he's called some of the allegations false. Look, these are great people at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They didn't send the memo by accident. This was them seeing things that are very concerning to them. They put it forth. And look, it doesn't matter whether you're Senator Schiff or whether you're a famous person. If our team sees something, they're going to say something, and we're not going to be deterred or defamed by people who are wanting to cover up for what their actions were.
Yeah, meanwhile, you and I have been talking about the president's push to take part of these mortgage companies public. And you gave us your thoughts on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are going to be huge deals. Fannie Mae IPO is going to be a huge deal. I spoke with Treasury Secretary Bessent about it and asked him whether the government is going to sell about 5% of Fannie Mae. Here's what he said.
That's what the banks have advised so far. A $30 billion deal would be one of the biggest deals, maybe the biggest deal in history. And these are very large companies, valuations in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So if we were to sell a 3 to 6% stake, it would work out to at least that. Every bank's going to be. All the big banks are going to be part of something that's this size, and we're honing in on that. The president's been busy doing peace deals, trade deals, tax deals, and he can multitask better than anyone I've ever seen.
Mr. Chairman, what else can you tell us about this? I know you've made the point that these two companies are incredibly critical to U.S. housing and to the nation overall.
Well, it's great that we finally have a president that, number one, knows that they exist, and number two, is looking to extract appropriately and legally value from them for the benefit of the U.S. taxpayers. So that is a huge departure from where we were. If you recall, some people tried to get the president, and he very wisely decided not to sell the companies years ago. He doesn't get much credit for it. He should get a lot of credit for it because at the time they wanted him to sell these companies for 150 billion. Today, those companies, in my view, are worth to the United States government potentially 500 to 700 billion. I think that number is going to be going to trillion and potentially trillions one day. So this is another example of President Trump finding money where nobody finds it. They wanted to steal the company, as far as I'm concerned, years ago. He stopped that. And like one of my friends says, everywhere President Trump looks, he finds money, and he's found money at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we're going to keep on making money for the benefit of Americans.
And so you're not going to sell all of the stake, right? The government will still hold a piece of Fannie Mae when the IPO happens?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. If the president decides to do it, which will be on his own time frame, we're in no rush. The president holds all the cards. So he'll decide what to do and when to do it. But, yeah, I think we're looking at about 5%. And I think it will be very oversubscribed. I mean, the president has a lot of popularity, so that will transfer very well into a Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac largest IPO in history.
Yeah, I know. Every bank wants it. And so you're going to have lots of major banks selling it through their systems. Meanwhile, mortgage rates are holding steady. 6.5%, according to Freddie Mac. Secretary Bessent said that President Trump could declare a national housing emergency in the coming weeks, planning new measures to tackle rising costs and falling supply. The secretary also predicted those trends will reverse once the Fed finally cuts rates. Chairman, what are your thoughts on that? When will we actually see a break in mortgage rates?
Well, I think we'll finally see it when we finally see, and again, I'm talking policy, not legality and some of the other matters, but in terms of policy, when people start to really believe that these days of Jerome Powell holding the American people hostage is behind us, because then builders and everybody in real estate can start to plan for the future. The problem is right now, Maria, is there's so much uncertainty because of Jay Powell and what he's created with these interest rates that if you're a big builder, right? And look, I love Pulte Homes. I'm not with the business anymore, but Lennar or D.R. Horton or any of the big home builders, why would you want to go and invest in land right now when you have no visibility into why this guy is keeping interest rates at 4.5% and inflation's at 1.5%? These rates should be 3% lower. So if we could get those interest rates down, I think you're going to see a building boom. And I think that President Trump fundamentally understands it better than any president in history. So, but look, we got to reverse what happened these last 4 years to get the American dream back. Biden killed the American dream of home ownership, and we're resuscitating it. Every day we're resuscitating it, and we'll bring it back bigger and better and stronger than ever before.
And the president said that every 1 point in a move in rates represents, what, like $350 billion, right? I mean, part of the reason that he's pressuring Powell to cut rates is because it's so expensive to hold the debts that $37 trillion means we're paying more on the interest on that debt than we do on defense spending.
Correct. And then, like I said, you have multiplication of that, which is that builders and people aren't investing in the United States. So the president is absolutely correct. It's a trillion. It's a trillion plus plus. I think it's trillions and trillions of dollars worth of investment that Jay Powell is starving this economy from. Meanwhile, President Trump is getting this economy to boom after these last 4 years.
All right. Thank you for the update. Great to see you. William Pulte joining us. Welcome back. And now this, Russia and China signing a deal for a new gas pipeline after Vladimir Putin meets with Xi Jinping in Shanghai yesterday. This binding agreement sets up a massive pipeline to deliver gas from Russia to China through Mongolia over the next 30 years. It's all happening at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. This summit in Beijing is featuring leaders from China, Russia, India, and North Korea. Iran leadership is expected tomorrow. India's Prime Minister Modi visiting China for the first time in 7 years, as President Trump's 50% tariff on India took effect last week. The president is calling the U.S.-India-U.S. trade relationship, quote, a totally one-sided disaster, adding that they have now offered to cut their tariffs to zero. But it's getting late. This should have been done years ago, says the president. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman for the Institute of the Study of War, General Jack Keane, back with me. General, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to get your take on this summit underway in Beijing with all of America's adversaries.
Well, there's nothing unusual, certainly, about Russia and China being together at the Shanghai summit. Based on the fact they're both authoritarian regimes, they both want to control their sphere of influence in their region, Russia in Europe and China in the Indo-Pacific region. And both of them desire that the United States be deposed as the world's global leader so they can have more influence. What's different here is India. India does have a relationship with Russia, geopolitically and militarily, for years. But the fact that they're at the Shanghai summit in China, that is really the geopolitical difference here. As we both know, China and India are the two largest countries in terms of population, but they're vastly different. India is the world's largest democracy, and China is an authoritarian, repressive regime. And their historical differences, their military differences, their diplomatic differences are deep, and it's likely not to be overcome by this one meeting. I suspect that maybe the motivation for Modi to go to China at this particular time has much to do with the tariffs that the president has imposed on India and try to correct the imbalance and also try to have some impact on India buying Russia's oil. You have reported many times here that it is China and India that is propping up Russia's economy by purchasing their oil in vast quantities. And hopefully, if it doesn't look like there's going to be a material difference, coming out of the U.S.-Russia talks, that the United States does the same with China, imposes those significant sanctions on China purchasing that oil. But this is people are calling this a major reset between China and India. I don't think we should go that far. I think more needs to be seen here, Maria. We have multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican, and certainly the first Trump administration is included in that, has added value to the India-United States relationship. And that has been building through the years, and increased military assistance as well. So that relationship has been moving in the right direction. It remains to be seen if this is really a systematic break. I doubt it is, because India's interests as a democratic society are much more aligned with the United States than what they are with China.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. So where are we on Russia? Because President Trump's deadline for Putin to set up a bilateral meeting with Ukraine's Zelensky came and went yesterday, right? The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, said that everything's on the table when it comes to potential Russian sanctions and secondary sanctions, while Putin is defending more attacks on Ukraine, General. The Kremlin also accused of jamming the GPS navigation of a plane carrying EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen yesterday over Bulgaria. Now, the plane landed safely, but there was worry there for a moment that was as close as it gets to a potential assassination attempt.
Yeah, certainly that's an alarming incident, to be sure. But looking at what's come out of the Alaska summit, Putin again, put on the table promises of a bilateral meeting with Zelensky, a trilateral meeting with President Trump. Now his spokesperson, as of yesterday, denied that there was ever any agreement to do any of that. So promises made and promises not kept is what we see continuously out of Putin. And, as you just noted, escalating the war. And escalating the war against what? Against the civilians in Ukraine. That has been the major military significant thing that has taken place since the talks began with President Trump, is the escalation of the war against civilians, the very thing that has always had President Trump's attention, and that is the unnecessary killing that war brings to the table. Yeah. So I think the president, has a decision to make here, and I think it's time to bring the hammer in terms of what you just talked about, sanctions to be sure, and tariffs, but also increased military assistance, give Ukraine what they need to shut down Russia's offensive operation that's going on, small tactical gains to be sure, but shut it down, give them the offensive weapons, and give them the authority to use them in deep attacks into Russia. All of that, the three of those things combined, will get Putin's attention. And we gotta understand, when we use the hammer, it's part of the peace process. It's attempting to change the adversary's behavior to come to the negotiating table, much as President Trump did with Zelensky when he wanted conditions before a ceasefire, and then finally came to the table with no conditions for that ceasefire. I think that's where we are, and that's what we should be doing with Russia going forward.
What do you think China is promising Russia here, General? I mean, clearly they are showing a united front. And I know you say that there's nothing abnormal about that, but is China giving Russia promises of a backstop or support should things turn ugly with the U.S. or deteriorate further?
Well, China has actually been Russia's #1 supporter. They don't give them a military platform like a tank or an artillery piece, but they give them everything to help make that platform. And then all the needs for an army to be on the battlefield, not just the material needs. There's so much logistics and other things that are needed for that army to be sustained on the battlefield. They're helping them do all of that. And the #1 assistance they're providing is revenue, because they're buying vast quantities of Russian oil.
Yeah, there you go.
And we've got to stop that. And when we dry up Russia's revenue source, he has huge problems then his defense industrial base, and he can't produce the materials he needs for that battlefield. It is that simple. And with the weapons that the Ukrainians need, that 1-2 punch will really make a difference dealing with Putin and where he is. Where he is right now is he still wants to control Ukraine, still wants to expand into Europe. He's not given up on those objectives. And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. He talks nice, but we all know what he's really doing. And he's not fulfilled any of the promises that he made.
No, he has not. General, it's great to get your insights as always. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great talking to you, Maria. Thank you.
All right. General Jack Keane.
The tariff battle rages on in the courts, with President Trump's administration set to ask our highest court, the Supremes, for an expedited ruling on the levies. Just last hour, the president issuing a warning if the Supreme Court rules against his tariffs.
Our country has a chance to be unbelievably rich again, but it can also be unbelievably poor again. If we don't win that case, our country is going to suffer so greatly.
What's the backup plan, sir?
But I think we're going to have a big victory.
Larry Kudlow.
Yes, ma'am.
Take the floor. How do you see it?
I'm totally with the president on this. I think the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., I mean, it's a Biden-esque and Obama-esque court. Although, interestingly, there was some dissents that I think will carry weight with the Supreme Court. But look, the basic part here is he chose IEEPA as an emergency, urgent way to deal with the trade breakdown that we've had. And he wants to move forward on this. It's funny, I don't really see the problem here. It's like, Okay, he's made these deals all across the world. Businesses are adjusting. The stock market has generally been very, very strong. The economy looks fine. As a side thing, as a byproduct, he's making a couple of $100 billion off of tariffs. It would be ridiculous to refund that and send it back. I don't know how the heck you do it, by the way. It would be one of the biggest, messiest, chaotic money exchanges in history. He's not taking the jurisdiction. It's not. I know that specifically Congress is in charge, has jurisdiction over tax cuts. I get that, okay? But these are not even permanent tariffs. These are negotiated tariffs to rebalance trade. That's a key point. He has the right, according to the legislation of I believe it was 1973, then amended in 77, something like that. He has the right, however, to regulate imports. And he also has the right and obligation to stop the drug trafficking. And maybe most of all, my take is he conducts foreign policy. He is the commander-in-chief, okay? And all of these trade negotiations with Japan, Korea, China, the European Union, India, you name it, these have important foreign policy implications. This is as much a foreign policy act as it is a measure to rebalance trade and stop the unfair practices around the world against the U.S. So I don't see what the problem is. I think the Supremes are going to say the same thing.
Are you arguing this in front of the Supreme Court? You could be quite good at that, Larry.
I've been honing my arguments. We had Jeff Garish on last night. He's a very smart fellow. But I talked to a lot of people about this, lawyers and non-lawyers alike. I'm sorry, look, it's the D.C. Court of Appeals, okay? We know a lot about the D.C. Court of Appeals. Trump has tangled with them before, and they lose. And they're going to lose again in the Supreme Court.
I don't want to open it up, but I want to raise this, though. The way the president talks about it, though, it doesn't sound like these are temporary levies. That he views it, and I'll tell you, like,
he said without them, the country is going to crumble and collapse.
He loves the revenue. He has made that crystal.
Yeah, but you don't know. When I say temporary, the tariff rates will be temporary. We don't know, and he doesn't know. Look, he changes them, again, depending on foreign policy considerations. Okay?
Like India.
Thank you.
Best example.
That's exactly the best example. 100%, Jackie. Actually, I would even add Canada to that. When Canada endorsed what the Palestinian state, he jacked that up. That's why I keep making the point. This whole tariff diplomacy, as I call it, is as much foreign policy as it is economic policy, but both are very important here. So I'm just saying, to your point, it could be 15%, could be 25 or 30%. That's different. You know, the Congress would lower the marginal tax rate. That's their jurisdiction, and that's permanent. Okay, permanent until it gets changed years later. But this is a much different game that Mr. Trump is playing. It's not like tax policy.
It's harder to make the foreign policy argument with, like, a Switzerland, though, isn't it? Like, I get it with India. Like, India, actually, I get it.
Or Canada, or Israel.
I don't know. Canada, you could argue about that, but there are definitely some countries in there.
And how about Russia? We got a big Russia thing coming.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we're going to talk about it later or not. He's going to take action against Russia. He has lost his patience, as he should, with Russia. Now, how far he goes, tariffs are going to be part of the Russian, shall I say, solution. And that's foreign policy. And that's why these courts should stay the heck out. It's not their jurisdiction.
Years ago, Larry, I have to ask you, you wrote an essay, an op-ed, I think, called Taxes Are Tariffs.
Yes.
Excuse me, Tariffs Are Taxes.
Yes.
In 2018. Is that still the case? In the revenue that you talked about that the president is enjoying, isn't that revenue coming from American citizens and companies?
Well, by the way, I probably shouldn't say this, but I would remind that for businesses, for corporations who are tariffed, that is a deduction.
Americans.
That is correct.
Right.
So the so-called pain and suffering from the tariffs is ameliorated substantially because it is, in fact, it's cost of doing business, and you can deduct that, blah, blah, blah. But look, yeah, tariffs are taxes, but again, I'm saying none of this is permanent. And my argument here, and I wrote when I was in office, I wrote 2 op-ed pieces preceding G7 and G20 meetings with the president's sign-off. He is a free trader. I've said this to this group. I've said he's a free trader. What he's saying is, though, I don't mean you, Jonathan, personally, but foreign competitors have been unfair. They keep us out of their market with high tariffs and particularly non-tariff barriers, which is the real game. And he's saying the only way I can knock that down is if the United States takes actions. We will not let them just sell into our market. We're the only game in town. You're going to have to pay more. And that is look, almost all these deals, as far as I know, barriers are coming down from our competitors. In other words, his plan is already working. There's even some evidence that imports are slowing and exports are improving. It's early in the game, it's only 6 or 7 months. But yeah, I think he's a free trader. This is the way you have to do it. Reciprocity has always been a brilliant idea. I am a free trader, Jonathan, I still am. But I support this action because this is a pro-American, we fight back action.
Did you ever, I think about this in terms of what does the next guy do? Okay, so IEEPA, we're using it now in this reciprocity fashion, that's what we call it. The next administration, not Donald Trump, not J.D. Vance, a left-winger. So they're going to get in sometime, okay? And they say, you know, all these polluters around the world, these CO2 emitters, that's a national emergency. It's killing the climate, and we're going to throw tariffs on all of their stuff coming in.
Yep.
You know, like we can't import any energy from Saudi Arabia because they're polluters, or like you know. Israel, they're human rights abusers, and so we're going to put a huge tariff on Israel because they're. So I think IEEPA, if it's allowed to stand the way you're talking about, seems to me like the kind of tool that can be used by folks who I vehemently disagree with for policies that will wreck our country, and they'll say, well, my precedent is the Trump administration. Is there a way around that, Larry? That's what I'm asking.
Brian, you just have to have confidence in democracy.
In the left-wing president coming down the road? Because I don't.
No, in the democracy and the voters. You just have to have confidence that the voters
came through this time.
That is correct. Yeah. And, you know, we said this.
There was a time before that, though.
All during 2023 and 2024, when they were using lawfare and weaponization and trying to throw Trump in jail for 750 years and take his businesses away. And I said time and time again, whatever courts may say, whatever special counsels may say, whatever the Justice Department may say, the real jury here is the November election.
American people.
And the American people will vote. And Brian, you know, you and I wouldn't like that use of IEPA. I agree with you about that. Okay. But you kind of have to, in a democracy, you take your chances, you put your best foot forward, and, you know, shows like this, and you try to persuade people.
At top of the show, we were looking at the markets. Obviously, you've got a Dow that's down. Last time I checked, the NASDAQ and the S&P were up, so it's mixed today. Markets are not falling out of bed on this uncertainty. Right.
I know, yeah, exactly, including the bond market. I was reading yesterday bond rates, and I looked. Yeah. The worst the 10-year got was about 427, 428. It's fallen back down. That's the bond market. No, there's none of this. You know, let me just step back, though. You remind me of a point. Our friends at a certain very conservative editorial page, which is associated with this company, right at the beginning, have screamed at Donald Trump for any of these actions, okay? And they've argued, of course, the Smoot-Hawley argument, which was the worst thing ever in history. That was a 60% tariff, okay, which invited retaliation from all over the world and probably contributed enormously to the global depression. Okay, I buy that. But here's the thing. This time, there has been no retaliation. We had temporary retaliation from Canada, but they pulled back. We had temporary retaliation with China, but they pulled back. This time, it's deal making. Which is what the president said at the beginning. Deal making, okay? And That is so important. And the levels we're talking about the effective tariff, if we froze this in time right here now, is probably somewhere around 13 or 14%. It's not 60%. Now, is that higher than 2 to 3? Yes, absolutely. But then again, sometimes you use a carrot, sometimes you use a stick when you want to change the other team. But I'm just saying, this is not 1930s. We've had deals, not retaliation. There was never a global trade war. All these editorialists have been absolutely wrong. They won't admit it. They probably never will. I love all of them. They're dear friends of mine going back 40 to 50 years and the supply side revolution, and you may know who I'm talking about, but they've been wrong. I'm sorry. With all due respect and love, they've been wrong.
But I see people in this administration, including the Secretary of the Treasury, bragging over and over again about its $400 billion and climbing of how much money these tariffs are bringing in revenue. And when you sound like that, you're bragging and crowing about a tax. Whatever you're crowing about, crowing about revenue, and to think that the Democrats aren't paying attention to this new source of government revenue. So I'm not even talking about the court decision. They're paying attention because that's another way they can claw money away from businesses and individuals.
Well, that's why we should hurry up. And my view is I'd like to take those revenues, the bulk of them, and cut taxes. Just give it right back to the people.
Yeah, where's the money?
Right back to the people.
Where is that money?
Which money?
The money that they're bringing in through the tariffs. Like, I think if they could show the American, I know, but if they could,
Treasury Department.
I know, but they should show the American people.
The bureaucrats who run it.
Yeah.
I don't think they have an assistant secretary yet for that. Yeah, but that's because Chuck Schumer won't let stuff go through. Francis Brooks is assistant secretary for trade. I don't know whether he would be. I mean, the money will sit in the Treasury's general account if you're asking a technical issue. But no, cut taxes. I mean, Trump said it again today. So he was asked a question, would this replace the income tax? And he said, well, we don't know, but something to look at. And America has a history of that sort of thing. I don't think it'll replace the income tax. What's the income tax? A couple $1 trillion.
Yes.
So we're not going to get there. But I'm not thrilled about building up, high tariffs to get revenues. Incidentally, the Laffer curve would kick in eventually. We won't buy anything. I don't want to go down that road.
Right.
But I don't think the president has. Dan Clifton does this all the time. Is such a smart fellow from Strategas Research, Washington Research. We're about 14% effective tariff rate. Geez, that's not bad, and that's temporary. If this Besson's going to keep negotiating, Lutnick's going to keep negotiating, et cetera, et cetera. The president will keep negotiating. Here's where the foreign policy stuff comes in. Look, let's go to India. India did not join the axis of evil cabal, frankly, even though they flirted with them, and they've been bad players.
Some flirting there.
There was some hand-holding,
right,
which
but
I didn't
no
like.
kissing on the mouth.
That's right.
So
That's
it was
right.
okay.
You're exactly right. Well put.
Yes.
Well put.
We're okay here.
But I'm just saying that tariffs will play a role with U.S.-India relations. It did in the first term. I sat in all those meetings, and it will right now. But Dagan's right. We did. It was a little heavy petting there for a moment, but nothing worse. No, I didn't see any penetration or anything like that.
On that,
Okay, we gotta go.
I love Larry Kudlow so much for saying that.
You have to be disciplined.
Okay. Now this, dozens of scientists are denouncing the Trump administration's climate report. They say that report is riddled with errors and cherry-picked data. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, he was on the program earlier today, and here's his response to that.
You can see how political climate science has become. Over 90% of what's mentioned in the report, Stuart, is straight out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. We're just amplifying what's already in these sort of long, detailed, nerdy reports. And of course, that tones down the overheating about climate change, because most of what's in there is real physical data. There's change going on, but it's actually not alarming. It's not fast moving, and it's nowhere near the world's biggest problem. But if you're an activist in this space, you don't like that being downplayed.
All right, joining us now, the founder of Power to the Future, Daniel Turner, joining us again. Daniel, what do you think the harmful effects of CO2 emissions are overblown? You agree with that?
Oh, 100% overblown. And when you look at this from a pure economic perspective, go back to the debate last year with President Trump and Vice President Harris. And she mentioned how they had invested over $1 trillion in the green economy. That's not money that came out of the free market productive side. That is fiat tax dollars that were printed. But that money went somewhere. It went to wind mills and solar panels and EVs. Well, those people need an intellectual foundation for that $1 trillion of government grift. And so their intellectual foundation is paying a bunch of climate scientists to scare the markets into saying, you need to give us money. No one would fund wind turbines or solar panels if government didn't require it, and if there wasn't this fear that climate change required it. So yeah, I'm not surprised the climate scientists are angry. They're getting paid to defend $1 trillion false economy propped up by the taxpayers.
There's one court ruling that's it's gone very much in Trump's favor. The environmentalists have just lost access to a huge, I'm calling it a climate slush fund. My question is, does this effectively kill a lot of climate activism for the next couple of years?
It really has to. I testified before Congress on this just a couple of weeks ago, and this is, again, taxpayer money that is given to left-wing causes. We've always wondered how these environmental groups have so much power, so much clout. There aren't enough Americans writing $10 checks because they believe this nonsense. It's government grift funneled through these taxpayer-funded programs, and when their funding dries up, the activists as well will dry up. This is a sector of the society that has done tremendous damage to the energy markets, to human dignity overall. And seeing the climate movement die a slow and painful death gives me great joy.
Oh, yeah. What a guy. A slow and painful death gives you great joy. Okay, let's turn this around for a second. Do you see any positives in climate change? Is there any good that comes out of it?
Yeah, there's a lot of good in CO2. We talk about CO2 as plant food. We talk about CO2 as growing green spaces worldwide, right? The problem with, again, this climate science report, we don't have to prove that they're wrong. They kind of have to prove that they're right. And how many years, 30, 40, 50 years we've been hearing about the end of times because of climate change, and none of the predictions have come true. It's at the point now that it's laughable when the John Kerrys or the Greta Thunbergs say we have 5 years left, 10 years left. So the climate hysterics, they've never measured up to all of their apocalyptic proclamations. And I think Americans are just tired of it, especially when the result means give up your car, give up your gas stove, pay more at the pump. All this nonsense has to come to an end. It's costing us dearly, and I'm glad it is coming to an end.
Glad it's coming to an end. Okay. Daniel Turner, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it, sir. Very much. Thank you.
The Treasury Secretary says a housing crisis is brewing and the White House could declare a national emergency. Welcome to the Big Money Show. I'm Brian Bremberg, along with my co-hosts Marcus Lemonis, Jerry Willis, Jackie DeAngelis, and with us for the hour, Making Money host Charles Payne. Welcome, one and all. Scott Bessent believes rate cuts from the Fed would ease America's housing squeeze, but the administration isn't waiting on Jerome Powell. They're considering sweeping reforms, from standardizing building and zoning codes nationwide to slashing closing costs for buyers.
And I think that President Trump fundamentally understands it better than any president in history. But look, we got to reverse what happened these last 4 years to get the American dream back. Biden killed the American dream of home ownership, and we're resuscitating it. Every day we're resuscitating it, and we'll bring it back bigger and better and stronger than ever before.
But Scott Bessent is still projecting optimism, telling the Washington Examiner he expects a big economic pickup in 2026. So, Charles Payne, come to you first on this one. The American dream, housing. Is it an emergency situation here? And if we do something like that, do you think that's going to pay economic dividends?
I believe it's been an emergency situation for a long time because I tie it into household formation. And I think this whole fertility crisis, population situation is probably one of the most dire things happening in our nation right now. And it's slow and no one pays attention to it. But the idea that once it crosses the so-called Rubicon, to turn it around. In fact, most wealthy nations, particularly Western Europe, for some reason, they're just we're the only species that's not really trying to procreate to keep the species alive. And it's really wealthy folks, and there must be some psychology and other things involved there. But the crisis has gone on a long time. I think rates will play a big role. We don't want the government to go too far, right? We know what that looks
and
like.
I'm thinking 2008 every time something like this comes up, and that's not a happy place.
Right, we don't want the government to go too far. There's no doubt about it. Some of it, though, I think a lot of it, honestly, is if you get mortgage rates at 6 and under, I think that's going to be the magic number. I think already supply is already growing. Prices have come down 4 months in a row. That's the right combination to maybe start to get more people to buy.
Okay, so does the declaration of an emergency, Jackie, maybe help with a little bit of the trend? We're seeing more inventory, lower mortgage rates. You put something else on the table around zoning, and that kind of helps get things moving.
Yeah, and this is an administration that focuses on what is the problem and how can I fix it. But what I like to look at is how do we get here, Brian? And Bill Pulte talked about, Biden and killing the American dream. And he did that to a certain degree. Inflation, higher rates, that made it harder for people. Onerous regulations. Trump administration is going to try to roll those back and help with the supply quandary. But I really focused in on what J.D. Vance talked about last week when he discussed the migrant crisis, allowing more than 20 million people into this country illegally, and how those people need to scoop up housing and they need to live somewhere. And so that takes from the inventory and drives up prices. And I think that's a huge piece of how we got here. And I think why I'm bringing that up is because I think it's so important for the American people and the people who watch this show to understand these mistakes cost us. They cost me, they cost you, and they take a long time to unwind. This isn't going to happen overnight, even if Besson is correct and the president does declare a state of emergency in this regard.
Jerry, I know you're fired up about housing.
I'm fired up.
So I know you're paying attention to this news. Are you fired up by what the administration is talking about? Or like Charles, do you get a little concerned about going too far on this stuff?
Well, you don't want the hand of government deep into housing, right? Like we've seen that before. In fact, George Bush put forward some regulations. He made it easier for people to get mortgage loans. That was a disaster back in 2006. But what I want to see and what has to happen, look, residential construction is in free fall. It's down 3.1% annualized rate in the first half. It's a disaster right now. And what is the problem? It's regulation, too much regulation. On average, the price of a new home, $400,000 plus, a quarter of that, $100,000, is due to regulations. Those numbers coming from the National Association of Home Builders. I like this idea that the president has of KOing capital gains on what you make on a house. That's going to target those markets where prices have gone up the quickest, the fastest, the most, exactly where we need some kind of relief. But, hey, number one, let's get rid of some regulations.
So, Marcus, it's interesting, by the way, another piece of that Scott Bessent floated was maybe some tariff exemptions around building materials. That would be a cost side thing. Now, that's just an idea that he mentioned. But these zoning restrictions are local. You know about local regulation. I know you do because you deal with it all the time. These are local things. So how do you, at the national level, do you clear out zoning regulations?
I think I may have to sit this one out against the panel. I'm not sure what the emergency is.
Okay.
What's the emergency? First, you started, Charles, talking about the birth rate. That's a separate issue. I'm not sure how that correlates to the housing market.
Well, if you can't buy a house, most people don't want to have kids. I mean, there's a direct correlation between that historically with America and the rise of the American century. And that's one of the key things. If we're going to have a second American century, it's got to center around the home, which is the primary investment. But young couples, if they can't buy a house, they're going to rent a small apartment and they're not going to have kids.
So in the last 48 months, we've seen housing prices skyrocket. And now we're talking about having tariffs on aluminum, steel, wood, and a variety of other things. I'm just confused.
You're talking about removing them for the building materials.
So we're going to pick and choose where they apply?
Well, that's what they're going to do, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're talking about, look, that is a pick and choose, but they are talking about picking and choosing maybe no tariffs on these things. I mean, it's
no tariffs depends on who's buying them or where they're being used, because it's not no tariffs unilaterally across the board. It's no tariffs if you're going to build the home. So if Lennar's going to build the home, they're going to fill out a special form and saying, we're just buying aluminum and steel to build a house. We're not using it for anything else. And anybody else who's using it to build a car or do anything else, you're going to pay a tariff.
Can I?
I think there's an affordability issue for me more than anything.
I'm so glad that you said that.
Let's call the emergency affordability.
And that's where I was about to go, because I think, Charles, you're touching on that, and I could go on and on, but I won't do it today, about, you know, how expensive it is for people to have kids, why people are delaying those decisions. I agree with you. If you feel like you don't have a place for a family to live, it makes it really hard. So that's one piece of it. But this affordability crisis, Marcus, this is what Zohran, the commie, is seizing on here in New York, and it's resonating with people because rents are so high and it's so hard to get, you know, a place to live. And so I think that that really is the thing that the administration is trying to focus on here. I don't always agree with the solutions. So I hear you on picking and choosing, and I kind of feel like if Dagan was here, she would say the same thing. I'm not necessarily sure what the answer is to solve it.
I mean, supply and demand. You have to have more homes, right? So that, I mean, it's supply, but I think a lot of supply will come online because of reluctant sellers, people who locked in pretty good profits who've wanted to sell for the last few years, but say, hey, if I sell, no matter what I make in terms of profits and I move somewhere else, I'm not going to pay 7% mortgage, right? The races. So, you know, I've seen surveys. Right now, you have 500,000 more sellers than buyers. Right. So it's completely flipped in the last 4 years.
Which is good. That's
good.
How markets should
work. Now you got to get to a point where, okay, there's an urgency or less reluctance. Okay, if I sell, you know, and I make this big profit, 200 grand, and I buy something that's smaller and I'm paying just maybe, you know, 5%, 5.2%, and I had a 3.2. The math has got to work out for the sellers. They have to be motivated.
More supply.
Right, but I'm saying if the sellers create the supply, you know, you can get more supply from.
I'm going to stop everybody for just a second. You want to create more supply, you're going to have empty houses. You want to have empty houses, you're going to have bad commercial loans. You want to have bad commercial loans, you're going to have defaults.
Bad commercial loans are really,
because you're going to build these houses on spec with the anticipation that rates are going to drop. And if they don't, what happens?
Now, I'm talking about people who already own homes selling them.
And where are they going to go?
Right. Well, most of them are going to probably end up going there. Since 20% of
Did you almost say retirement home?
So, apartments or condos, because 20% of the population, the old folks, own 40% of the homes. By the way, the largest percentage of them live alone right now in the history. They're lonely. They're sitting in a house wanting to sell if they can get the right price. They're not going to buy another house when they sell. And so there will be supply out there faster than you could create it, I think, organically.
So I think you objected to the emergency thing. Fine. Can I change the word? What if I just said we got a really, really, really big housing affordability problem, and there are things the administration could do to unlock that log jam?
This country has always had a housing affordability problem. This is not a new thing.
But the scale of it has changed, don't you think?
No, I don't actually.
Marcus, the median home price is multiples higher than it was 40 years. I'll read
a stat. We'll skip the opinion for a second. Okay. So the annual income needed to buy a house in 1950 was $3,400. 1980 was $30,000. In 2007-8 was $61,000. Now it's $110,000. It is by far rocketing far faster than the rate of inflation, much farther faster than the rate of wage growth. No one's wages have grown to this degree. And so, yeah, affordability has never been this is the worst it's ever been.
Did you give us a number from right before the pandemic? Right before the pandemic, it was like $80,000 for the entry-level home. It's now about $110,000, like you said. That's in a period of 5 years. We've never seen something like that before.
I just want to make one point, though. Prices skyrocketed because interest rates stayed low for so long, and so prices just kept going up, up, up. During the pandemic, we saw it because people were chasing things in the suburbs. They were fighting over homes. Even though we've got an influx of sellers into this market, if they're still kind of digging their heels in, that they've built all this profit in their home and they want to be able to cash that out before they're able to go, and they're not willing to yield in any way. Because typically when rates go up, we've seen prices come down, but these sellers are they've been very, very inflexible. It's coming to the realization that, you know, a certain amount of profit is enough, and at a certain point you've got to let it go. What that tipping point is.
Well, that's why the administration is talking about like the capital gains exemption,
which I think is a great solution
to try to unlock it.
And I'm all in favor of reducing people's tax burden, especially capital gains. You're the one who took out the mortgage. You're the one who paid the mortgage year after year, month after month, forever. Why shouldn't those gains be yours?
That's right. I agree with that.
Well, you know, Jackie brought up the politics on this. I just don't think you can ignore it. The left is is actually playing the affordability game, Mondani, and he's doing a really good job, good enough to be leading in New York City. You got midterms. Look, forget about the economics for a second, or tie them together. The politics of this in a nation that is saying, especially for young people, I can't afford a home. The politics on this are pretty good.
I'd like to see industrial and job creation outside of city centers. And when you have that, you have a reason to build homes. And when you have a reason to build homes outside of city centers, they are less expensive, and the affordability issue gets resolved partially from that.
But
the tariffs are going to drive that.
But we have not seen the kind of job creation that we need. It's at half the level of last year.
That's why we have the tariffs.
Average job creation, 81,000 a month. We need it to be higher to create that income, because you don't buy a house without a job.
We need to make more here. That creates the jobs, in my opinion.
The administration is focusing on. And I would just highlight what you brought up with George Bush and Bill Clinton, believing that everybody should have the American dream. And all of a sudden, we had a huge housing problem on our hands in terms of a bubble and a financial crisis. So I think when government starts to get too picky about how they want to specifically fix it, it is a little bit dangerous.
Well, the Community Reinvestment Act, which was like the third iteration when Clinton got involved with, it was just an unmitigated disaster, right? Yeah. I mean, the liar loans, all of that was just, it was a wild, wild west. I think what we're all kind of saying, though, is that there, at least most of us, that there is some sense of urgency, but you can't fix it overnight. Although I think sounding the alarm does help.
Yeah. It gives people a sense that their leaders are on this issue.
If you look at Gallup, and when Gallup asks people what's the best investment out there, by far, every income bracket says real estate, a home, owning a home. You know, in fact, middle and lower income put the stock market like third, I think. You know, so. Right. You know, and soon Bitcoin may pass that up.
That's crazy, though, because if you actually do some of the comparisons, and we've done them, where you rent for a certain period of time or you buy, appreciation hasn't kept up with the stock market has done. So,
but the average American thinks owning a home is the number one.
It's also how it makes them feel.
Yeah,
should be.
Yeah,
sure.
Just very quickly, I'm glad to see young Americans want to own a home, because we went through a very long period where people said, I'm not buying a house, I'm not buying a car, I'm going to rent everything, I'm going to own nothing. I think that's a recipe for disaster.
I think COVID was the change.
Where people wanted to own.
Yeah, we were being told that we should be not an ownership society, and people were buying into it. Like one house on the block and everyone's got an app to share it. You know what I mean? Then after that, you know, you would get in the building, you were afraid to touch the button. Like, who the hell touched this button before me? I'm moving out to the suburbs, right? It changed everything.
All right, speaking of things you can own, Jerry, you're watching gold for us. What's going on?
I am indeed, Brian. Gold soaring above 3,500 to record highs, and it's fueled by mounting expectations that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates this month. Charles?
No, I mean, there's a lot of things driving it, right? I mean, you can see the writing on the wall the last couple of years on central banks outside of the big ones, right? But all the global central banks really started to load up. And now, of course, it's just seen as the hedge, right? The hedge against uncertainty. And it's the trade. It's also the hot trade. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of cash out there that chases the hot trade. And this is the hot trade in the moment.
Prices are looking hot right now.
China's having a massive military parade that President Putin and Kim Jong-un will be attending. Do you interpret that as a challenge to this? And are you concerned at all about those countries trying to be some sort of counterweight?
Not at all. China needs us, and I have a very good relationship with President Xi, as you know, but China needs us much more than we need them. No, I don't see that at all, no. And I had actually a very good meeting with President Putin a couple of weeks ago. We'll see if anything comes out of it. If it doesn't, we'll take a different stance.
That's President Trump being asked about China's massive military parade. We're going to show you these pictures here. Beijing showing off its nuclear ballistic missiles, its weapons, and giant underwater drones, all while North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian leader Vladimir Putin look on. Putin and Kim meeting for more than 2 hours on the sidelines of the event. Kim telling Putin it's his country's duty to help Russia as Putin invites him to Moscow now. President Trump putting the world leaders on notice yesterday with the Truth Social post, writing this: May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America, writes President Trump. Joining me now is Heritage Foundation Vice President of National Security and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, Victoria Coates, back with me. Victoria, great to see you. What's your reaction to all of that?
Well, good morning, Maria. President Trump made another point in that Truth Social post, which is that the people of China would probably be speaking Japanese if it weren't for the United States intervening in World War II. And so, yes, that was a victory day for China, but it was even more a victory day for the United States. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And then finally, I just say, the combined GDP of Russia and North Korea and China is not exactly dwarfing the United States. The United States at 30 billion is much greater than they're about 20 billion. Toss in the UK and EU, which were both in the Oval Office 3 weeks ago with the president. That's over 50 billion. So I think that is the metric that I would take into consideration when judging that parade.
Well, it's a great point that you make. You look at the economy of Russia, it's about the size of the economy of Texas. So, yeah, you're talking about apples and oranges when you look at the difference compared to America. But are you worried that you've got all of these adversaries sort of huddled, whether it's, Xi Jinping in China, Vladimir Putin in Russia, Kim Jong-un now. You've also got Iran leadership expected today to show up and adore that military parade. Does it bother you that you've got adversaries against America right now teaming up?
Well, as the president says, they're conspiring against us, and we need to keep an eye on them for sure. But, I mean, Iran is another just decaying economy. This doesn't add strength to China. It's another dependent on China, something that China needs to take care of and support. If you look at our partners and allies, and are they perfect? No, they're not. But they're doing extraordinary things. They're productive. You're looking at the EU. You're looking at the UK. You're looking at countries like Japan. You're looking at countries like Australia, like Israel. These are all great allies to the United States. They provide support to us, especially with President Trump's leadership, doing things like getting our NATO partners to cough up their proper percentage of GDP on defense. So I don't like it. It's not fun to watch, but at the same time, I think we can put up something much, much better.
Victoria, what did you make of this Russian effort to literally potentially assassinate Ursula von der Leyen the other day, using the disruption of an American space-based system? They jammed the GPS, and the media is just ignoring this. Wasn't this a huge deal that Ursula von der Leyen's plane was hit by suspected Russian GPS interference?
Yeah, this was really disturbing, Maria, and I've seen other episodes of this. I've seen China do it to American planes. It's a nasty little game where you are playing with people's lives, and it shows us the vulnerability of a lot of these systems, space-based systems, on which we are completely dependent at this point. So I think this is why, figuring out what our security posture is for space is so very, very important. President Trump and the administration, I know, are very focused on that. But at the same time, we have to hold Russia accountable for almost downing the plane of the head of the EU. I mean, that's not a joke.
Exactly. I mean, President Trump's 50-day deadline for Russia to end the war on Ukraine expired on Monday. We still don't have a ceasefire. The president spoke yesterday on the consequences on Russia if no steps are taken toward peace soon. Watch this.
We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they do and what happens. I'm watching it very closely. Last week, they lost 7,000 between the two countries, 7,313 soldiers, to be somewhat exact, for no reason whatsoever. And they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, but, they're soldiers. I want to see it end.
So, I mean, he wants to see it end, but he's treading carefully. Victoria, what's your take on where we are now? By the way, Russia reportedly hit Ukraine's fuel structure overnight.
Yes, and this is kind of the diplomatic equivalent of a long, hard slog. The president's given Russia every opportunity to come to the table to strike a good deal for both countries. But what he's kept, in his back pocket, literally, Maria, are the devastating economic sanctions that the United States can put on Russia, as we've discussed, on India, on China, and really lower the boom on them. Use that economic might we were just talking about to force Russia to the table. Ask Chairman Xi, how much economic pain are you willing to eat to keep Russia afloat? So I think he wisely did not use that. that tool earlier on in this month when he met with, or last month rather, when he met with President Putin. But that is something he retains.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of this at this point?
This economic question is a big one because Russia's already paid, and not just 1 million lives, but they have, what, 10% inflation rate, 20% interest rates. They've been suffering for a long time. But I want to ask about the Indians, because India, according to President Trump, for the first time ever, has offered to bring down tariffs to zero. They are running scared of that risk of secondary sanctions, and yet Modi shows up with Putin over the weekend. Should we take that as them just bluffing? Because I imagine that it would be devastating to that shadow economy, right?
Well, it would be. And, you know, this is what happens when you burn a war economy, as people have called it, hot for 3.5 years, and you run out of the kind of material that you need to feed your population to grow your economy properly. So that is what is happening to Russia, and they're running dangerously low on foreign currency reserves as well. But I think you really put your finger on it with India because, you know, Prime Minister Modi, yes, he was there and he met with Xi and Putin, but he's trying to get President Trump's attention. But at the same time, India knows its future is with the United States. If you look at the communique that Modi and Trump put out after their meeting in January, this is a roadmap for a really bright, wonderful future for India that will be a contributing partner to the United States. I think it's really great that they're offering to lower their tariffs. We should get to an even playing field with them, but at the same time, move forward as partners and allies.
All right, we will leave it there. Let's see if India gets it and does the right thing here, because they're still buying Russian oil, and President Trump is watching that with that 50% tariff. Victoria, great to see you as always. We so appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Victoria Coates. Stay with us. A big show ahead. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, Russia and China signing a new agreement for a new gas pipeline after Vladimir Putin met with Xi Jinping in Shanghai yesterday. This binding agreement sets up a massive pipeline to deliver gas from Russia to China through Mongolia over the next 30 years. It's all happening at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit underway right now. It features leaders from China, Russia, India, North Korea, and Iran will show up tomorrow. India's Prime Minister Modi visiting China for the first time in 7 years as President Trump's 50% tariff on India took effect last week. The president calling the U.S.-India-U.S. trade relationship, quote, a totally one-sided disaster, and adding they have now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing, but it's getting late. They should have done so years ago. Joining me now is Stevens Inc. Executive Vice President, former Senior Advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mary Kissel back with me. Mary, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be back on the show.
Well, I want to get your take about this meeting that's underway in Shanghai. You also point out that the implications of the tariff ruling against President Trump here at home. Tell us more about what this meeting is telling us.
Well, I think the relationship between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin is really no surprise, Maria. We've talked at length on this program about the no-limits friendship between those two rogues, if you will. I think the real news here is Prime Minister Modi of India and his embrace of Vladimir Putin. That's a clear signal to the United States. And I think there are a couple of lessons here. First of all, I met Modi way back when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, I think more than 15 years ago. We misjudged him then, and I wonder if we're misjudging him now. Just because he's the head of a major democracy, the most populous democracy in the world, doesn't mean that he shares our worldview or shares our idea of what's in our mutual interest. I think the second lesson is that, if we are really serious about considering communist China the greatest threat to the United States and our way of life, we need India. It's just a fact. We can't fight them alone in Asia Pacific. We need the heft of not just Australia, not just our friends in Japan, but also India. So I think this meeting is highlighting a major challenge for the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, and not only that, but, there were so many corporates who felt that if they were going to take their supply chains out of China, they would put it in India. And now that is being rethought as President Trump is encouraging them to bring it to America, even if it's more expensive.
Well, President Trump is correct that it has been a very one-sided trade relationship for many decades, and that's not new to this administration. I think Republicans and Democrats in the White House have struggled with that for decades. I mean, remember, the opening up of the relationship happened under Bill Clinton. So, you know, we've been working on these issues for years. But again, if you believe that China is the greatest threat to us, and if you accept my argument that we need India then in the fold with us, the problem that we're facing is that even if we say, gosh, you know, we don't buy a lot of stuff from India, they need us more than we need them, China doesn't think the same way. So if we walked away from the table here, or if we said, gosh, you know, we're just going to punish them with tariffs because we need this trade relationship to equalize, again, the president is right about that. The problem that we face is that China is standing right behind, trying to improve the relationship, trying to step in if we step back. And we've seen that throughout Southeast Asia. We've seen it in Cambodia. We've seen it in Laos. We've seen it in Thailand and Maria. You know, we've got governments in Asia Pacific that are not on our side, old friends and democracies of ours. I mean, what if China targets South Korea next and President Lee, who wants to make nice with North Korea and wants to make nice with China, right? That's why I think it's a real challenging moment for the administration. I have confidence that the president, when he sees things don't work, he changes tack. And I think that, you know, this summit this weekend is highlighting a major inflection point in our relationships in that part of the world.
Well, I don't know, but I was interested to see a NATO ally there as well. The head of Turkey, Erdogan, is also at that summit. You've got China and Russia backing Iran at the summit as well, condemning a move by European countries to reimpose UN sanctions on Tehran over its nuclear activities. The UK, France, Germany invoking those snapback sanctions, accusing the country of violating the 2015 nuclear deal. Of course, that's the deal that President Trump pulled out of in his first term. The Wall Street Journal writes, quote, actually enforcing the snapback sanctions will require hard work by Western politicians, diplomats, and experts. And I know, Mary, you worked on this exact issue when you worked for the first Trump administration, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's office.
Yeah, we did work very hard on that. Just for your viewership, remember the snapback sanctions were supposed to be the safety blanket for those who were uncomfortable with President Obama's nuclear deal. You know, the argument was if Iran breaks its commitments under the nuclear deal, hey, don't worry, any signature to this nuclear deal can trigger the quote-unquote snapback of UN sanctions. Because remember, Iran is a threat in many ways. They're also a huge arms trafficker, drug trafficker, illicit finance, funding terror groups, you know, ballistic missile development, nuclear programming. I mean, they're a threat on many levels. So we said, okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Europe. Iran is not in compliance. This is under Trump 1. Please snap back the sanctions. And they said, nah, we don't want to do that. We think that would be a win for President Trump. So we worked very hard on this issue. We got very, very little support. And everybody knew what Iran was doing and how grossly they were violating the terms of that agreement, which, by the way, they were violating as they were signing it. And so what did it take for Britain, France, and Germany to come around to invoke snapback sanctions? It took October 7th. It took the Houthis firing missiles into the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea. It took a lot of killing in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq. It took a lot of, frankly, you know, innocent lives for them to realize, gosh, it's time. Oh, not to mention direct attacks on Israel, as we've all watched on this network over the last year. And so it's good that they've snapped back sanctions. But the lesson here, Maria, for Ukraine in those negotiations is, if the United States is not a party to a peace deal and we're not willing to enforce it, the Europeans aren't going to do it for us. That is the lesson of what we learned in the snapback sanctions. Something really bad has to happen for the Europeans to get off the couch and say, okay, it's time for us to enforce the words on the piece of paper that we signed. And so good for the E3 to do it. It's a victory for the White House. But, you know, there are lessons here for future deals and future challenges for the White House.
I mean, so how is President Trump going to stop this war in Ukraine? I mean, look, you say, you know, we need India, but India's buying Russian oil. I asked Christine Lagarde last week, the president of the European Central Bank, why the Europeans are still buying Russian oil. President Trump's deadline for Putin to set up a bilateral meeting with Ukraine's Zelensky came and went yesterday. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, told me and continues to say everything's on the table when it comes to potential Russian sanctions, while Putin defends more attacks on Ukraine. And the Kremlin is being accused right now of jamming the GPS navigation of a plane carrying EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen over Bulgaria yesterday. The plane landed safely, but there were worries there that that was close to an assassination attempt against her, Mary. Your reaction?
Yeah, that was a very serious thing, one of many provocations that Russia engages in. Look, President Trump and his national security team have to answer two very difficult questions. The first is, can they trust Vladimir Putin to respect any treaty that they negotiate based on his history? And if they can get comfortable with that and say, yes, we can, then they have to answer a second, even more difficult question, which is, how do we come to an arrangement that doesn't signal weakness to our enemies in China, in North Korea, in Iran? And so these are two very difficult challenges that they need to tackle. And I wish them the best of luck. The good news is, Maria, at least all options are on the table this time around, unlike the prior administration.
Well, look, that GPS jamming of the navigation system is because of operations in space. And I want to point out that we've got a new special on Fox Nation, The Enemy Above, where I look at space and why it's so important. Most people don't realize why space is so important. It's national security. It's where our satellites are. Mary, great to get your insights. We so appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
All right, Mary Kissel. And check out The Enemy Above on Fox Nation. We'll be right back.
All right, so joining us now, General Jack Keane, Fox News Senior Strategic Analyst. General Keane, welcome, sir. I'm going to guess that President Trump will, if he hasn't already, run out of patience with Vladimir Putin. And I wondered how you saw that and what happens next.
Yeah, well, I think we're approaching that moment for sure. I mean, the president exhibited, you know, extraordinary patience in trying to work this initially on the phone for many, many weeks. And, you know, with the promises that Putin said, yes, I'm as interested in peace as you are. I want to return to the wonderful geopolitical and economic relationship the United States and Russia had in the past during the first Trump administration. So all that nice talk. And then we had the Alaska summit, where I take the president at face value here, where Putin discussed with him having a summit between himself and Zelensky, and then also a trilateral meeting with President Trump participating to follow that. And then we have his spokesperson yesterday, Putin's spokesperson, said, oh, there was no agreement at all, you know, about a bilateral between President Zelensky and President Putin, nor a trilateral. So here we have where I think we are. Putin has been making these promises to the president, and he's not keeping those promises. And he's dealing with a man who's very faithful when he makes promises in President Trump. So, yeah, I think we're at that point. We're pretty close to it. And I think Trump's got a pretty big hammer that he can use, and I think he's likely going to use it, Larry.
I think Mr. Trump should just shut down, I don't know whether it'll work or not, but just shut down the world financial system to Russia. We can do that. Take them off the SWIFT system, take them off the Fed wire, no transactions, no nothing. You can raise tariffs, too, on oil-related purchases, but any country that does business with Russia cannot do business with the United States. Take them right off the wire. We can do that. We know how to do it. We've done it in the past. Take the reserves. There's $300 billion. You and I have talked about this. I've talked about it with Robert O'Brien many times. Take the $300 billion, liquidate the gold, liquidate the currencies, and give the cash to Ukraine. All right? I mean, there's stuff we can do. And as you know, President Trump is not someone who's going to allow someone else to play him.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And you spelled that out very clearly. You know, I listen to you. You're kind of my economic mentor. And I think what you're saying is different from what others have saying. Everybody talks about the tariffs and the sanctions, and of course, this is China and Russia creating a huge revenue source for Putin, other countries as well, Venezuela, Brazil. But the SWIFT transaction, I think, is very noteworthy because that is immediate.
Yep.
And that would get his attention right away.
Yep.
And that's what we really need. I would add to your list, there are military things that we could do. It is absolutely possible to upgun Ukraine so they shut down the offensive operation that Putin is conducting, even though it's small tactical gains. Just shut it down and also give them some capability to take some territory back. We can do that. The other thing, Russia has a sanctuary deep in its territory that we're not firing long-range missiles into. Remove those restrictions, upgun them with those missiles. There's no case for a country that invaded another country, Larry, that have a sanctuary and be protected in its rear area so it can logistically sustain the war it's fighting in another country. That makes no sense, and we should hammer them. You put all of that package together, and I believe as part of the peace process, because I think it still is, Putin will come to the table and begin to negotiate some serious concessions and compromises here. Otherwise, I think that we can't continue this pattern we're playing out right now.
Yes, sir. 100%. Yes, sir. We will be right back to you, General Keenan, perhaps in a couple days, because I think this thing is going to come to a head right away. General Jack Keane, thank you ever so much, sir. We appreciate it.
The president nominated me because I have policy views that I suppose that he liked. If I'm confirmed to this role, I will act independently, as the Federal Reserve always does, based on my own personal analysis of economic data, my own personal analysis of the effects of economic policies upon the economy, and act based on my judgment of the best economic policy possible.
The future of the Federal Reserve. The president looking to overhaul Washington's establishment, monetary establishment, and his first major appointment getting his day in front of the Senate Banking Committee. Welcome to the Big Money Show. I'm Dagan McDowell, along with my co-hosts, David Asman, Brian Brimberg, Jackie DeAngelis, and with us for this hour, Azoria CEO and Incubate Debate founder, James Fishback. Stephen Myron, President Trump's pick for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, pledging central bank independence at his Senate confirmation hearing. And Myron is calling for interest rate cuts. Now joining a chorus who say the Fed risks choking the economy to recession if it waits any longer. But looming over all of this, the drama around Lisa Cook. She's still on the board, although President Trump has fired her, but she is fighting to keep her seat. Now, the Department of Justice has begun issuing subpoenas and opened a criminal investigation. As Larry Kudlow put it on this show yesterday, Cook is already cooked.
When the jobs report comes out on Friday, let's hope the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, subtracts one government job, namely the former Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook. She was fired by her boss, President Donald J. Trump, even though, for some reason, she refuses to accept this.
Investors also watching closely because who sits at that Fed table when it meets less than 2 weeks from now determines whether interest rates fall in time to keep growth humming and whether politics will stall the economy's next big chapter. James, to you first on this. Quite frankly, if the government wanted lower interest rates, all they'd have to do is just spend less and reduce bond issuance. So I'm very concerned about this fixation on our central bank because it's really the central bank over the years that's gotten us into all these problems, juicing the economy and then bailing people out when the shinola hits the fan.
That is exactly right, Dagan. There is not a problem the Federal Reserve has actually preemptively, proactively solved in the American economy. They caused the housing bubble. They missed the boat. On Wells Fargo. They fell asleep at the wheel on Silicon Valley Bank. Now Lisa Cook, who's been credibly accused of mortgage fraud, wants us all to believe she can stay in a seat, Dagan, to stop mortgage fraud. Bill Pulte has said this time and again. This type of mortgage fraud undermines mortgage origination. We call it at Adversarial the Lisa Cook tax. We did the math on this, Dagan. Because of the owner occupancy fraud that Lisa Cook committed, if you were to eliminate all of that in the entire housing market, you would actually lower mortgage rates by 14 basis points. That might not sound like a lot, but that's $17,000 over the life of a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. So to your point, I think the Federal Reserve gets far too much credit on the way up and far too little accountability on the way down. I wish we could stop talking about it, but I'm glad that the president has removed her. And make no mistake, she is fired. Larry is right.
Well, she's still sitting there, and I'm kind of waiting to see if she's at the meeting next week. We don't have a clip of it. I know that Elizabeth Warren sits on the committee that is interrogating RFK Jr. today. I think she's questioning him right now. But she also sits on the banking committee, and it's high comedy that EWASI went after Vice Chair Richard Clarida and also Kaplan and Rosengren about trading and essentially forced Clarida to resign. And then where is she on this Lisa Cook issue? Anyone? Jump ball.
Well, she's on the side of the partisan Lisa Cook because the partisan Lisa Cook is who she likes to have on the independent Fed. She cares about an independent Fed as long as it's independent from anybody who thinks in a free market conservative way, potentially. The wheels of justice are turning for Cook, and I think that should happen. You got the criminal referral. I think she ought to have due process, and she's going to get it, and hopefully very quickly. And she will, if these claims are credible, then I think she'll be moved along and the president will have the cause that everyone debates. But I love how the Stephen Myron thing, all the critics of the president say, well, Stephen Myron, he's just there to turn the Fed into a tool of the president. And Stephen Myron, he's already gone up there and he's basically said, I'm here to be exactly what I ought to be, an independent voice on this panel, and I'm going to look at economic data and I'm going to make decisions based on that. And that diffuses all of the criticism. I think he's in favor of lower interest rates. Lots of smart people are, and they have good reason for it. So the Fed, to me, right now, and this is why markets don't care, it's much ado about nothing when it comes to all the critics who say the Trump administration is ruining the Fed. No, they're not. In fact, they might actually make it better and make it operate more like the Fed is supposed to operate.
By the way, you are supposed to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. I mean, that is the standard that most politicians, including, as you mentioned, Elizabeth Warren herself, who back in not too long ago, 2022, 3 years ago, talked about Fed officials making, and I'm quoting her, making a mockery of ethics. The central bank is a culture of corruption. That is Elizabeth Warren. That she used to be concerned about the appearance of impropriety. At the very least, she can step aside until this issue is resolved. She can put herself in a pause pattern of the Fed. If she comes in and votes 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks from today on this really critical interest rate decision that they've got to make. I mean, this could turn the economy one way or the other. It's really that significant. If she is voting in that, she makes a mockery of the words of Elizabeth Warren.
That's right. And
she's going to vote in it, don't you think? She's going to show up and vote. I think she is.
I don't know.
I don't know what are they. Is Jay Powell going to put a sentry at the door? Like, should he put a sentry at the door? It'll be very interesting.
To the Federal Reserve.
Well,
it's happened before where people have stepped down for improprieties, not as significant as this one.
Correct. Not a criminal referral.
Well, Clarida, Kaplan, it was questions about trading.
Yeah.
But there are 2 Republican senators at least who have said they will not consider a replacement for Governor Lisa Cook until her lawsuit challenging her firing by President Donald Trump is resolved.
Right. And I don't think resolution is the determining factor, so I don't agree with them. I think in the interim, while you're investigating something, while the DOJ is now looking into it in a criminal investigation, that, a suspension at least or the firing should stand. How could somebody who's being investigated for that still be able to serve in that seat? And the fact that she's being defiant about it, and the fact we're talking about, is she going to show up and try to vote? I mean, they talk about Trump being disrespectful and not doing what he's supposed supposed to do when it comes to the other side, or considering the Fed's independence. But her not respecting the system, as far as the left is concerned, is completely fine. And I bet you they're urging her to show up and try to vote
guaranteed.
and see what happens. I bet you it's going to be a total spectacle. But I also just want to talk about the independence in general, because I love looking at how the other outlets are characterizing what's happening with the Fed right now. CNBC, here's what it really means for Trump to get control of the Federal Reserve Board. The Harvard Kennedy School, the end of the Federal Reserve as we know it, question mark. CNN.
Question mark.
Trump backs off earlier claims that he should directly control interest rates. You know, he's allowed to have a voice, and he's allowed to say that he thinks interest rates should be lower. He is also allowed to support Stephen Myron as a Fed governor and put him up there as a nominee and say there should be many voices that are determining, with the Fed's independence, what happens with interest rates. It can't just be one-sided, that you have like people like Lisa Cook who are deciding what happens with the economy. And so I laugh at the way they attack him whenever he wants freedom of speech. He's allowed to say what he thinks.
That's right.
In the filing, the initial lawsuit, and you mentioned what came out yesterday, that her legal team is alleging that the Biden administration, when they put her up for nomination, were fully aware of these mortgage applications. Again, she was hoarding real estate with the best of them, but they said that her firing would cause irreparable harm to the U.S. economy, and that the short-term this is what Abby Lowell wrote. The short-term political interests of a president often clash with sound monetary policy. What in the high heavens are these people even talking about?
I mean, that's a good one, even for Abby Lowell. And
yes.
Come out with some pretty,
Yeah.
He's known to create
crazy
some,
arguments.
Yeah, he's known to
That's a
create
good
some
one.
circuses. He likes circuses. He did it with Hunter Biden. It's going to happen with Lisa Cook. There's going to be a circus at the Federal Reserve with her vote, and I think it'll actually backfire on her and her supporters.
Yeah.
The only thing I would push back on is it's related to, and it was my first comment, is that the economy is in peril if the Federal Reserve doesn't cut. It's just this utter fixation on the central bank in the markets and in discussion that everything revolves around our monetary policy and not our fiscal policy.
Well, I'll push back a little bit. I agree with you in general over the long term, but I started with the Wall Street Journal in 1983. The one thing I learned that markets, right now the markets are betting that there is going to be an interest rate cut, even if Lisa Cook is there. You see what's happening there. Short term, markets, investors have this knee-jerk reaction to the cuts or the increases of rates on the Federal Reserve. That's the one thing that is consistent, has been consistent for the past 4 decades that I've been covering. So the bottom line is the markets right now are kind of taking it in stride, as you were saying, Brian. And I would just say one other thing about the propriety of all this. You're right, there have been a couple of people who've stepped down because of trading issues. What Liz Warren was talking about when she talked about the culture of corruption at the Fed was James Bullard, who at that time was president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, giving an unpaid speech to a group of investors. An unpaid speech was considered enough for Elizabeth Warren back then to call a culture of corruption. If this isn't what she has done and what we have seen with our own eyes, at least suspicious in terms of corruption, I don't know what is.
I think it's corrupt that the Fed acts as economic FEMA. I want that to end.
That's right.
That's a great way to put it.
Then, as well as President Maduro, it claims that the U.S. is seeking a regime change with this naval buildup. Former acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf joining me now. Are we really looking for regime change, Chad? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't believe we are, and I don't think President Trump cares what Maduro says or doesn't say. This is about fighting the cartels. This is about fighting drug trafficking that continues to be exported out of Venezuela and into the United States. And President Trump has made it very clear time and time again, not only with Venezuela, but with other countries in the region, that that is no longer going to be the case. And he's going to take direct action, if needed, to stop the deadly flow of fentanyl and other drugs into the United States, killing Americans every day. We've seen other administrations talk about this. We've seen other administrations continue to admire this problem. I think President Trump should take a lot of credit and should get a lot of credit for actually trying to do something to stop what we see as deadly narcotics coming in.
But what kind of military action? This naval force is very powerful. They've got they've got a destroyer there. They've got missile systems. I mean, are they going to fire off against the cartels in Mexico or some other place?
Well, look, that's obviously up to President Trump and his national security team. But I do know that there are Coast Guard men and women on board of that, has law enforcement functions that can board vessels. And a lot of the vessels coming up from South America, Venezuela, and elsewhere are carrying those narcotics coming through the Caribbean to the United States. And there's obviously others. As the designation of a foreign terrorist organization, there's other authorities that the president now has to deal with, again, not only Venezuela, but other countries in the region that are continuing to export cartel violence and other drugs to the United States.
Would you mind if there were a regime change in Venezuela?
Well, I don't think anyone would mind that. Again, Maduro is not a legitimate ruler. I think that President Trump and his team has been very clear about that. I think it's a repressive society. The people of Venezuela are suffering under Maduro, so I don't know that anyone's going to shed a tear if there does happen to be regime change and the people of Venezuela rise up and say, look, we've had enough. We want a new direction for our country.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's heading to Mexico and Ecuador. He's talking about security in the region. This is about efforts to dismantle the cartels, halt fentanyl trafficking, stop illegal immigration. What kind of pressure is Rubio putting on those governments?
Well, look, it's probably an intense amount of pressure. A lot of this is done behind the scenes that never actually, makes it out into the news. It's what more can they do, both there in Mexico, there in Ecuador, which is a sort of a transient place as individuals come up from South America. What more can they do to stop that deadly flow of individuals and illegal narcotics coming into the U.S.? What more security do they need from the United States? What more resources do they need from the United States? So I think it's going to be a dual track conversation, meaning what more can they individually do and what more can they do with more resources from the United States.
Earlier this morning, a federal judge ruled that California can't, the administration illegally deployed the National Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles. Does that effectively now stop deportations out of L.A.?
Well, I don't think it does. Again, this is likely going to be appealed by the Trump administration, as most things are. Again, those troops were there to make sure to support federal law enforcement, ICE specifically, that were carrying out immigration enforcement procedures there. So I think the Trump administration is on pretty stable grounds here as this continues to be appealed. But look, ICE will still go into places like Los Angeles and other sanctuary havens to make sure that they are removing dangerous individuals. They're just going to have to do that in a safe way. So while this really makes it a little bit more difficult until it's appealed, it is on a stay at the moment. So they're able to continue some limited operations.
Got it. Chad Wolf, thanks for joining us, Chad. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.